lots of people who have joined on the fuse. So, topic today is back again to net neutrality, which had been hotly debated about 3 to 4 months back and has come back into news because internet.org is back in the news, partly because Zuckerberg is now very much in the news because of Modi's Silicon Valley visit and the town hall that he did over there with Zuckerberg. So the question really is, why is net neutrality important? And I think that's a fundamental issue that we need to address, because we have 3.5 billion people today on the internet, roughly 50% of the world's population, and it is expected that with the mobile becoming increasingly the way people are going to connect to the net, it is also becoming clear that in the future, a lot more people who are currently out of the internet are also going to be connecting to the internet. The mobile is going to be the primary method of people to connect to the internet, particularly in countries like India or in the what's called the global south. So therefore, internet is something that people are going to connect to. It's also true that when people connect to the internet, we see ourselves.
This conference is being recorded.
We see ourselves primarily as users of internet. We tend to think that we consume internet in some sense because we go there, we see websites and so on. There are two aspects to the internet that we tend to miss out on this. And I would like to bring it in before I talk about what net neutrality really means. The second aspect of internet is that it's also people providing information to us, which means that internet is also about what people supply to the internet. Why am I saying this? That today there are anything between 800 million to 1 billion websites, web pages on the internet. That means if there are 3.5 billion users of the internet, there are also 1 billion, maybe 800 million people who are also connecting to internet to give what other people use. So they're also users of the internet, but users in a different way. Now, how many of them are active? How much of that is really something which changes every day is open to question. But there is no question that internet for a whole bunch of people is what we give to others through the internet, rather than being just consumers of the internet. And that's a very important part of what internet is. So we tend to miss, in the conversation about net neutrality, we tend to think of the internet users being primarily consumers of information, consumers of services on the internet. We tend to forget the internet is also about what people supply to the internet as information, as something they share, as services that they offer, and so on. So it is as much about supply as about consumption. So I think this is an aspect of internet which is what makes internet as a media different from what has existed in the past. What existed in the past was what we would call as mass communication. You could either talk one-on-one to people, you could write them letters, you could have conversations, or you had mass communication in which you broadcast and others listen. The ability of others to communicate to a set of people was extremely limited because you needed a printing press, you needed a delivery mechanism to supply what would be a newspaper, a radio station. You need to have license, you need to have that money to be able to transmit, and then only you could broadcast. And similarly for television. So the cost of mass communications meant that very few people could communicate, and therefore there was, in some sense, a monopoly over the mass communications that people could do. So you and I could not become communicators in any sense because we did not have access to either the license or the resources that make newspapers, television, radio stations possible. So the fundamental difference of the internet has been that internet has allowed also people to become, in some sense, communicators, create groups, and through such groups to be able to talk to other people. So you have the possibility then of providing information, which is what mass communication media may not provide. If I take, for instance, newspapers, earlier, the news is something which could be set by, say, 10 media companies sitting together or watching each other and deciding what is news. Today, it's much more difficult to condition news in this fashion because internet will not allow easily such censorship to take place. So it was a kind of censorship which was not done by the government, which was done by media companies saying this is news, this is not news. Okay? So and you will see that more or less that is what for a long period, this is how news, what constitutes news was really determined by a handful of people. After that, you have 24-hour news channels. So television, Arnav Goswami at 9 o'clock decides what the nation wants to hear, right? So you have essentially news decided by 24-hour news channels, breaking news. Every channel continuously shows breaking news. So what constitutes news then gets set by the television channels. And today, it's really Twitter, Facebook, which sets also the agenda for what becomes tomorrow's news. So essentially, the ability to censor news in a way that you decide or a few companies could decide what is news is no longer possible. It does not mean internet has become very democratic. It's also true that in internet, I think about 75% of the clicks in the US, where studies have been done, go to only about 10 websites. So it could be Google, it could be X, could be Y, but 10 websites dominate what constitutes really the clicks on the net in the United States. So there is a monopoly building up there too. But nevertheless, it is true, because there are so many other channels of information, it's very difficult to get into a mode where you can keep out news. Now, the difference between the satellite television channels and the internet is this, and I would like you to look at the figures that are there, that even if you have a very large number of channels, and I would say anything from 250 to 500 channels is a very large bouquet of channels, compare that to 800 million websites on the internet. So that's a difference. So even if I have variety, I have, say, 50 to 100 24-hour news channels. You will see, if you look at them, you will find the news is more or less identical. If Sheena Bora murder is playing, it's playing on all the channels. So the variety of news is not conditioned by what we as a group might like to look at, but it is conditioned by what would be called the lowest common denominator. How do I get maximum eyeballs? And if maximum eyeballs are talking of Indrani Mukherjee and Sheena Bora, everybody is going to talk about it because that's the way they get the eyeballs, that's the way they get the advertiser, and so on. So the difference between a number of channels on television through the satellite dish or to the set-top box still does not compare to the very large diversity that you get on the internet, which may not be major news channels on the internet. They may not be Google's, Facebook's of the world, but still provides a degree of variety, which is far beyond what the other mass media can offer. So this is the big break that internet does. It breaks from mass media into what I would call as multicast. You have single cast, one-to-one, mass broadcast, and you have groups, which is multicast. That means I send to a multiple set of people, and similarly they can send to a multiple set of people. So this is the difference that internet has brought. The second major difference that internet has introduced is something which is quite new. We did not think that personal data could be a commodity. This is something that we were not aware of. If we went and said, hey, I'll tell you what I do, what I eat, what I buy, and where I go, who my friends are, it was not something you could buy and sell, say 25 years back. Nobody would even take you seriously. What do you want to, why would I want to know this? Are you some crazy nutcase or what? Now what has happened is the internet has discovered, or the companies on the internet have discovered, that personal data is a mine of information. And if I data mine it properly, sell it to advertisers, then it's big money. So it has suddenly discovered a completely new business model which did not exist earlier. In fact, when Google and Amazon started, people said there is hardly any future for these companies. They'll never be able to make money. And today Google is one of the most profitable companies in the world. Okay, it's become Amazon and Google have become, much bigger than the brick and mortar companies that we grew up with. So suddenly the ability to sell personal data to advertisers and make money out of that has meant that personal data has become a new commodity. A lot of people are saying that this is really the 21st century oil. What oil was to the global economy, today data is the new oil. Whoever strikes data then can use it to buy and sell and leverage his company to become the new giant, future giant. And already the 10 largest internet companies really are based almost entirely on the ability to buy and sell us as commodities to advertisers. So if you think you are a user of the internet, you are a user of Google, Facebook and so on, yes, of course you are a user, but you are also a product, because you are being sold to the advertisers who then sell you targeted advertisements, and then apparently instead of a blanket advertisement, a targeted advertisement is much more likely to fetch you your buys, that you will buy it. So that's a much more likely occurrence. Therefore, targeted advertisement is becoming the new game. Google has probably 50% of the digital ad revenues of the world, certainly in India. So 50% of the revenues are Google's. Facebook announced its results only a few days back, and it has risen from when it went public with its IPO. It had calculated every user is worth $4 to them. That means every user who could be sold to advertisers was on the average worth $4. Now the figures are $12.76. That's the latest figure. So that's Facebook, and Twitter is behind, but it is not too far behind. Google is, of course, way ahead of the pack. It's a biggie. It is the biggest of the lot. And the only ones who have been able to protect, in some sense, their internal market is China, because of this great firewall of China, which was introduced, people felt, for political reasons. But what it has done, and I'm not going to make value judgments here, what it has done is effectively it has allowed China to protect its internal market, and Baidu, Tencent and Alibaba are the only ones who are among the 10 largest internet companies in the world. There are only 3 which are non-US. All the others are US companies. And the reason they have been able to do it is Chinese are 1.6 billion people, so they have a large internal market. It's a market in which Facebook, Google was really not allowed to play, and therefore they have been able to build their own companies. And it's also true, they have been quite innovative in what they have done. So they have new combination of social media which has emerged there, which we don't know about, but which are really something which are widely popular. So given that, today I would rest to the second part of my description of what is happening in the digital economy, is that personal data as commodity has changed the way internet economy works, and therefore, when we talk about what the issues that we are going to see on the internet, we have to take that into account. The third important issue, and I think this is something that all of us will share, is that internet today has become basically the biggest public infrastructure for dissemination of knowledge. When we want to look at something, we want to find out something, instead of looking for the encyclopedias which you might have otherwise had, looking at specialized journals, ringing up people who are quote-unquote experts, what do? We Google it, okay? We go to Wikipedia. If it is not so much of a contested topic, we get our information from Wikipedia. So, internet has become a public infrastructure for knowledge. That's the fundamental characteristic today, which differentiates it from in earlier days. That earlier you had quote-unquote experts, you had quote-unquote specialized journals, you had specialized knowledge, and you had expensive encyclopedias, which most people only consulted when they went to the library. This was the infrastructure of knowledge. Today, internet has become the largest repository of knowledge. So it's not just a question of something that is, a luxury to have. It is going to become the necessity in the future for people, because it's the infrastructure of knowledge that exists. Of course, there are consequences, government interactions, and so on, which I'm not going to talk about in this. But obviously, if it's a public infrastructure, then government services which we use becoming available to the public infrastructure also becomes an issue. So when you look at net neutrality, please keep all this in your mind, that when you talk about net neutrality, these are all the issues that are going to come. Now, what is net neutrality itself? Because that itself is also a matter of a lot of controversy. But particularly the controversy is because there are quote-unquote what I would call people who are motivated, who have a vested interest in presenting one side of the picture. I have no problems about saying that this is where I stand, these are the issues, and I stand here because of this. That's a fair argument. But I would not really change the information that I give just because I have a particular point of view. So net neutrality in a very simple sense, and this I will qualify just after I have said it, is because, as you know, all simple statements have their pitfalls. So in a very simple sense, net neutrality is treating all data packets on the net equally. Now, each of them have their, we have to qualify. What does equally mean? Equally means that it is equal insofar as I do not discriminate from one source or destination to another. That means I'm neutral to source, who has sent the packet, I'm neutral to where it is going. So the infrastructure, which is the network will not make a distinction depending on source or the destination. The second distinction it will not make, though this is an issue that we need to think about a little more, is based on the kind of content the kind of content in the packet that is being sent. I don't look at that. I will only look at any data packet as like any other data packet. Now this has the following problems, and we should be aware of the problems before we look at what we are talking about. Now, one issue that comes up, suppose there is congestion on the network. Now, if there is congestion on the networks, I have to decide which data packet I send, which data packet I hold. This is what is called network management. Now, when I do network management, I may decide that, hey, if it's a real-time voice communication, I should privilege that over an email, okay? Because in times of congestion, the real-time information has priority over something that if it is delayed, it doesn't make a difference. It is not it's a completely asynchronous communication. I can hold it without any consequence. So it is true that when I do traffic management, I will have to consider what kind of service the data packet is supposed to be fulfilling, and I will have to take some calls on it. But what I do consider is that I would not do it on commercial considerations. Commercial consideration is because you have paid me more than he has paid me. Therefore, I'll privilege his packet over yours. Now, if I have two sources, one is paying, one is not paying so much, I privilege one to the other. That would be a commercial discrimination, and net neutrality would be violated if such commercial discrimination is made a part of the transmission system itself. So when you talk about internet, I'm also talking about internet merely becoming a transmission system for data packets. So all the what would be called the all the basic conversions are done at two ends. I convert whether it is an email, whether it is a picture, whether it is a video, or it is something else, voice. I convert all this into data packets on my computer, and then I send these data packets to the internet. So what the internet is really a means of transmitting data packets. But because all the conversions are done at two ends. So this is really the way I do it. And if this is so, then if I do not privilege a packet over another on commercial considerations, except on what may be required for the purpose of simply, simply the network management, then I'm really then observing rules of neutrality for the internet. So that is one. The second part of it is that it allows connections to everybody in a similar way. That means I will not discriminate between you connecting to the internet and he connecting to the internet or anybody connecting to the internet. The packets will have the same level of priorities. So I will not make the internet as a network should not make a discrimination who can connect and who can receive. So neutrality is not that I receive all packets. Neutrality is anybody pays X amount of price to connect. If he wants a higher bandwidth, he pays a higher price. If he wants a lower bandwidth, he pays a lower price. But once he puts it on the internet...
Can you repeat the last sentence? There was a drop in audio.
Okay. I'm saying that irrespective of who connects, they pay the same price for connection. You can pay a different price for bandwidth, but you do not pay a different price for speed of transmission through the network. You just pay a different price. I may have a 2 MB connection, somebody else may have a 6 MB connection, but he does not receive the packets faster. Because the connection is bigger, he may receive more packets in the same period of time. But the network does not speed his packets, just as if I connect to the internet, YouTube or my server will get the same connection when it is put on the internet. YouTube obviously has buffering, it has lots of servers all over the world, therefore your user experience on YouTube is much better. But the point is, each packet of YouTube which is put on the internet is treated the same as a packet of NewsClick, say, which is also put on the internet. The packets, once it's on the internet, is treated similarly. What it does is allows, therefore, the 800 million websites to behave roughly on parity. On this, my NewsClick website has the same, shall we say, reach and the same ability to communicate to rest of the world as, for instance, Guardian has. Now that is the one part of internet which makes it different from all other means of communication. Today, if I put a television channel, if I want to reach Brazil, then I have to pay some Brazilian, set-top box supplier or a Sky dish wala over there to carry my channel. But if I'm doing I put NewsClick, I've connected to the internet, I don't have to worry who is seeing it. Anybody in the world can see it. And that's the basic distinction, that the connection and user being able to treat the internet as some kind of infinite resource is what makes this possible. That means anybody who connects to the internet gets access to the whole of the internet. And I'm talking not as only as a user, but also as a supplier of information. So you have to look at it both ways. So when people talk about net neutrality, the argument tends to be more on the basis of I, as a consumer of internet, forgetting that there is the other side who's supplying the information to you. So if people say, okay, poor cannot get full services, but it's all right because they will get at least 500 sites, 1,000 sites. What we are doing is we are robbing the internet's diversity and converting it to cable TV. That's what it will become. 500 channels, 1,000 channels, what's the difference? It's like cable TV. So what you offer, instead of my being able to see, for instance, sitting in Brazil, I want to see, I'm an Indian, I'm there for 3 days, I want to listen to a Hindi film song. I cannot do it because then I'm not carried by, say, the Brazilian platform if internet becomes like cable TV. So the issue really is that the diversity of the internet and net neutrality are connected issue. We don't tend to see it this way because we believe we are consumers of the net. We do not believe that we are also the ones supplying the net. And if we look at, as I said, the ratio of sites to consumers, it's not a bad ratio. 800 billion sites to 3.5 billion users of the net. That's a pretty good ratio, 1:3, 1:4 kind of ratios we are talking about. And if you also see how many sites we are involved with, I probably am involved with, say, 8 to 10 sites. But I doubt that there is anybody in this. I think that a lot of you would be connected to some site or the other in terms of posting information, apart from Facebook. I'm not counting that. Okay, so apart from Facebook or Twitter, you are probably also, yourself also in some sense are also using blogs, you're writing things, you are transmitting information about yourself. So you are not just consumers of the internet, you are also the ones who build the internet. The second part of net neutrality is that if we consider that we treat everybody equally, so we allow the diversity of the internet to stay. If we don't do that, what happens? Why would a Facebook, for instance, offer a truncated internet.org in which people would be willing to go there? What is the effect that's going to happen on others? It's simply, why would Facebook do it? Now, Zuckerberg says he's doing it because he really loves the world's poor and he would really like to help them and get them connected and so on. Now, the key issue is that if the next expansion of the internet is going to take place in what is called the developing countries, who are going to be largely on mobile, we are really talking about the next 3.5 billion also consumers. Okay, we are talking about their personal data. You're also talking about what would happen to that personal data. Effectively, whoever goes into internet.org, now it's called freeservices.org, as a service, would also then share their personal data with Facebook. So if you offer a service on Facebook, that's what internet.org, then whatever the customers you have, their personal data would also be shared by Facebook. So for Facebook, it's a very simple thing. If they can get a bulk of the future users of the internet, they also get what is driving their economics, which is really the personal data as commodity. And what it would do is also, it would in future, that any startup which comes up, which could become like Facebook, could become like Twitter or any other startup for that matters, means that it has to share, if it wants to go on internet.org, has to share its users' personal data with Facebook, and therefore essentially loses the primary business, shall we say, capital it has, which is user data. So internet organizations are based on user data, as we have discussed. So that is the capital. So what it means is you share users' data with Facebook, and they will again get the lion's share of the advertisers. So it is in some sense that you may reach the Facebook audience doing that, but what you would lose is the basic reason for starting up an internet company, which is finally have an internet business. So it is something that can be an adjunct of your business, but you don't become a Flipkart, you don't become a Snapdeal, you don't become an Amazon by doing that. And unfortunately, that's the way the future, or fortunately, whichever way you want to put it, is the way that the future buying and selling is going to be. So this is the other part of it, that you really are going to lose user data to Facebook, because they then would have access to all your customers if you are a startup on that and you want to be on the internet.org platform. Yes, you would reach a certain set of people, and yes, those people would have access to your site, unlike they may not be connected to the bigger internet, so they may not be able to connect to you. So, but that will come at a cost. The third part of it is that Facebook is also saying that it will allow now transactions, commercial transactions, which is you use your credit card or use PayPal and so on. It will allow those transactions to take place to the internet. Now here is a big, to Facebook, here is a big issue. Because Facebook is the platform, or internet.org is the platform, you will not be doing the transactions directly on the commercial sites where the financial transactions now take place. Financial transactions, as you know, takes place through secure sites. You have the HTTPS, that S is really for the secure sites, and it encrypts your communication back and forth so your credit card information remains secure. Facebook is saying that it will encrypt this communication to itself and again encrypt it back to the commercial transaction sites. So they will be doing the function you will be directly doing. And as a result, there would be a security hole in the middle. And therefore, you would get what are called man-in-the-middle attacks. That means anybody who pretends to be internet.org will get your credit card information. Anybody who hacks into Facebook's security, I don't know how secure they are going to be, would get all the credit card information. So it's a big security hole that is there. And the fourth part would be that the government services, which is what they're saying would be offered through Facebook. This is really, to me, an extremely problematic area, because what you're really doing then is saying anybody who wants to use those government services on internet.org would then perforce have to share their personal data with Facebook. As I said, this is again, for me, it's a commercial issue. You're letting them benefit out of government services by getting the user's data. So these are the issues that come up. I'm discussing really internet.org because the earlier net neutrality debate, which took place and is still taking place in different places. But that was that you do not privilege some companies' information over others. That means you don't pay the telecoms company, who runs the internet infrastructure, you don't pay telecom companies to speed up your data packets. So that was the earlier debate of net neutrality. The current debate about net neutrality is more about what is now being called as zero rating services. That means you get first so much of the internet free, you will get some companies free, or you get some websites free. These are three variants of what are called zero rating services. That means your data cap will not apply to Google or YouTube, say, or Facebook. That data caps will be minus this. This is one kind of zero rating, because Google and Facebook, then you can always access, but you have reached your data download capability. Your speed becomes slower with everything else except Google and Facebook. So this is one kind of zero rating. The other kind of zero rating is that some services you can access free without paying for it. So internet is free in that sense. So this is what we are talking about, is internet.org. So you can have different kinds of shall we say zero rating, but these are the two most common zero rating services. So zero rating services, there have been people who have argued, okay, net neutrality is bad, but zero rating services we should allow because it's providing access. It's otherwise somebody does not have access to internet at all. So if you get access to 1,000 sites, what is the harm? And I would argue the harm is, well, you set those 1,000 sites as the internet for those people. And you are then saying that poor people deserve a poor internet. Now, this is the whole debate we had when we were talking about what kind of houses should be built for the poor. And there were weaker sections housing schemes. And we used to argue at the time, just because they're weaker sections, we don't give them weaker housing. You may give them houses that are different, but you don't give them weaker houses. In the earthquake they fall down. So poor internet for the poor cannot be an answer, particularly when the main infrastructure for the internet is being built by the government. Let's be very clear. The basic infrastructure for what's called the backbone of the internet is what's called the National Optical Fiber Network. And that's being built with government money. More correctly, is your and my money, because it even comes out of what's called the Universal Service Obligation Fund, which is what every telecom user pays for every call that he makes. Part of it goes to what's called the Universal Service Obligation Fund. So bulk of the National Optical Fiber Network is being built with this what is called the USO levy. That's a USO levy that you and I give. And that's the money which is going to build the National Optical Fiber Network. And that's the backbone of the internet. Yes, we have problems, other problems also. The exchange points where our internet infrastructure connects to external world. The interconnections, their interconnection charges. There are very serious issues with these interconnection charges because the big players extract the money from the small players. And our network is that of small players. Therefore, we give money to the big players while they don't take money from each other. So big players exchange data free. If Indian internet infrastructure connects to a big player, then we pay the money. So this is quite different from the telecom system that used to exist, still exists, where actually the smaller countries, the smaller players, the poorer nations were subsidized by the richer nations in terms of the interconnections. That if a call came from the US, they paid money and we paid less money when we made a call to US. So it was an asymmetric transfer. Now it has got flipped. Poor subsidize the rich. That's the way the internet works in terms of interconnections. So those points are still there, but the bulk of the internet infrastructure in the country is being built by the National Optical Fiber Network, being built by with government money or your and my money. So what we are talking about really is the last mile connectivity to the internet. That, as you know, is a fraction of the cost for the internet exchange and the backbone of the internet. The bulk of the cost is really the backbone cost, which is going to go up to the village panchayats. That's the remit of the National Optical Fiber Network. It will connect up to the village panchayat level. Then what we're really talking about in terms of connection to the internet is the last mile connectivity, as it is called. That from that village panchayat where the backbone of the internet will terminate, how does it get taken to the village? And how does it get taken in the urban areas from this backbone? So what we are really talking about is, say, a 10 years time in which the backbone will be there, the last mile connectivity will be there. We have the ability to give the internet, the full-blown internet to the people. But if we trap them in this 10 years to an internet which, say, 500 million Indian people will think Facebook's internet is the internet, what we will kill is the connectivity to rest of the people. It will kill the connectivity to rest of the communications that today we do on the internet, by which we reach the number of people that we do, and we will then privilege Facebook essentially as the monopoly of the future, who will then hold that precious economic resource, the personal data, as a corollary of this, as a consequence of this, and then that becomes essentially the monopoly, one single monopoly, who will then determine what your digital economy would be. So I think this is a very big issue. It's not as minor an issue as it appears. It's not that, well, how does it matter? The poor at least get some access. It's really a much bigger issue than that. And I will end with a very rather alarming note. I know when I'm saying this, I'm being a little, shall you say, over the top. You see, when the British built its empire, Britain was a small island. How did it build an empire of this magnitude? Because it controlled the oceans. And the British Empire or the colonial empires were really all built by those colonial powers which controlled the oceans, Britain being the preeminent one. Okay? What do you think the future empires are going to be based on? My argument is the digital oceans. Whoever controls the digital oceans will control the future global empire. And therefore, what appears to be a minor issue to me is a very major issue. You know, when the British traders came to India, all the Indian kings and lords were very happy. They're giving us money. You know, they're giving us money to finance our stuff. So I really get another source of money. And they thought, like the Indian traders, that we'll never have to pay them back. Kya kare? No? Well, they did pay them back, some of them with their lives. Okay, they became all subordinates to the British. So when people come and offer something free, be a little more careful about what is the real trade involved. So, as I said, the kings at that time thought they're getting all this free money. Didn't work. Okay. So anybody who offers something free, one has to be careful. Why are they offering free money to us? Because essentially free services is like free money. What is in lieu of that, we have to think. And what is in lieu of that is the control over our digital economy. So I will stop here because I think I've exceeded my time.
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Hey, Prabhi.
Yeah.
Prabhi, that last point was fantastic. It was brilliant. I can almost see you on a stage of a TED talk.
God forbid, TED talk.
Like the dramatic conclusion of it. So, is it open for questions? Because I had a few questions.
Yeah, we know that. Yes. We know that you are the first one to ask the question.
Yes. So, Prabir, it's actually a question and a point. So, essentially, what we are, because you struck a point about Great Wall of China, the Great Internet Wall of China. So, essentially, what's happening with us with Internet.org, is it fair to say that it's the Great Wall of Facebook for India? You know, because it is giving us truncated network, but the China's consideration of truncating the internet were to save its internal markets and to some extent its security, which was fair, I suppose. But now Facebook's consideration is, as you point out, a futuristic digital colonialism. You know, so
I would make the following distinction.
Truncated internet.
Yeah, I would make the following distinction. China blocks a set of sites. Facebook will allow only a set of sites if you are willing to accept their terms. So the number of how many sites China would block out of, say, 800 million sites is probably, say, 10,000 sites it would block. Okay. I don't think it sort of does the reverse, that it only filters certain sites. It actually blocks sites. The ability to block sites is always lower. But if you only permit sites to come into your platform, then the number of sites you get into your platform are going to be much lower. So in that sense, Facebook would give you a far more truncated internet than what the great firewall of China does.
So it's way worse.
I think so. I think it's really making a much smaller subset of services. And what they really want is that people should use Facebook instead of internet. You know, because Facebook gives you a lot of the functionality of the internet. A lot of the people say, hey, you know, I don't have to go to internet. Facebook is enough for me. So I think that's also what its intention is. That can I lead from internet to Facebook as the trajectory rather than from Facebook to internet as such. You know, and Facebook is what's called the walled garden. because nobody else can search in Facebook. It doesn't allow various things. In fact, it doesn't allow various things to take place because only Facebook can do that, others can't. So Facebook can search, but others really can't search, or at least Google can't search. All the scrollers are not, you can't use on Facebook. So there is a whole set of things that Facebook can do on Facebook, but you can't. So that, unlike the internet where you can do whatever you want on the data that you want. We are building, for instance, in our media project, it a website scanning, say, dashboard. Now that's not something you can do for Facebook. If Facebook gives it to you, it's okay. But you can't do it for Facebook because only what Facebook will allow are the only things that can work there. So I think those are the kind of restrictions which are, to me, even more worrying in terms of Facebook. So that's the advantage of still the Chinese model. Yes, it's truncated, but it is political. It doesn't allow a set of things to happen on it. But the rest of it is free. Okay, rest of it you can access. But here it's going to be much more selective, and that's my problem.
So Nag has a question. What would it take for the government to provide basic internet access to all citizens, say 115 KB or 1 GB per month?
Well, the cost in terms of the backbone is already being incurred. The issue really is the last mile connectivity. How do you connect, say, from the villages? How do you connect the houses to the internet? So the data part of it is really to be not the major issue, because it's really the bottleneck there is the backbone infrastructure, which is going to be quite robust. The real problem are going to be the interconnection charges. And that is a problem because the interconnection charges can be quite high. The real investment problem is the last mile connectivity, not so much for the urban areas, but particularly for the rural areas, that even providing mobile connectivity, etc., is going to be the key issue. So various solutions are being looked at. None of them, by the way, are very expensive. But the point is the government of India's current position is that this is something only private companies should do, not the government. And that's a kind of mindset issue because they're saying the mobiles are basically with private players. Telecom, we would like private players to be the major suppliers of services. So how they should do it is something they have to work out. It's not my headache. And that's the kind of discussions we have been having with Department of, not Department of Telecom, with the USO authority, which is, and the Northern authority, who are the ones who are pioneering this. The basic understanding is it's really going to be the private industry which is to offer. Government is not going to come into this. And I don't really see rural areas being a commercial issue for the private players. So that's the big hole in the Indian plan for internet supply. So I don't think that the data connectivity is a big issue as far as I'm concerned, because once you have the backbone, then that is in place, except for the backbone costs.
So he also says that the government, if the government wanted to take up such an initiative, surely the great philanthropic Mr. Zuckerberg would cut a big check.
So just to add to that point, to this point, I have a question that so like you said that people, if this internet at all comes into India, it will, what do you call, sandbox the entire internet and say, okay, this is the internet, what do you get? But to the 800 million people who don't have access to internet, isn't that very bad thing? Or let's say in India especially, 10 to 15% of higher sections of society are one which is going to do the startup and are going to be the, as you call, the provider of information. Largely 80% of the Indian population is still going to be the consumer. So are we the correct people to decide what they should get if someone else, third party, is going to get them a service which our government is reluctant to provide? So is it really very bad? Can we have a kind of a law that keeps in a check and allows this third party interchange to happen so that people get some benefit out of it? Because as you said, rural areas doesn't have that commercial what do you call, bonanza. So a lot of companies don't take that initiative.
Bonanza.
That bottleneck would still stay because without mobile connectivity, you can't connect to internet.org anyway. So the problem of the last mile connectivity is how do you connect through the mobile, if that's the connection that you want, how do you connect the rural people to the telecom network? Once you've connected to the telecom network, the cost of the internet then is the issue that we are discussing. And that was really Nag's question. So I was saying that cost is a small incremental cost. That's not a big cost. Okay. So, and the telecom interconnection is being provided by the telecom companies. My problem is that telecom companies are not interested in the rural areas. So anyway, what you are saying still holds good because the mobile connectivity is very poor. Forget rural areas. It's poor even in half the urban areas that we know. Okay. So that is the last mile.
I can't see your video.
The last mile connectivity therefore becomes a different issue. To us, that's a telecom issue. Once we've got the last mile connectivity, then the issue is what is the cost required to provide internet? And my argument is that it is not a very high cost. It's actually a pretty low cost. Okay. And offering a poor internet to the poor is something which is something that we are going to take a long-term decision, which if we took a different decision as a country, we could say, first, as Nag has raised, 1 gigabyte free to every Indian who connects to the internet. Okay, that's a cost the government takes. Okay, what is the cost of that? Instead of offering this to Mr. Zuckerberg, will make this free, and therefore free internet he will provide, but that will have only 1,000 sites. Okay, so the options are really those. So for a country, are we capable of making that decision? My argument would be if I can spend 70,000 crores on building an internet broadband backbone, what prevents me from giving, say, free internet for a limited period to to all the people? Is it, if the consequences are such that it is going to endanger my digital economy, isn't that worth doing as a country? That's really my question. And that's the question that we need to answer. And then you say, okay, we'll offer it to Zuckerberg. We will provide government services through internet.org. Are we not then taking India on a path which will make, in some sense, our digital economy captive to Facebook? Now, if it is a future of the Indian economy, then I think it is not a question of what kind of services to offer at what cost. I think those are questions we need to also address. So, yes, you're right when you look at this question, and this is something my son said, well, they don't have internet. If they get something, what's wrong with it? So it's exactly the kind of argument you were saying, and it's a valid argument. I'm not going to dismiss his argument. It is a serious argument. And yes, am I the right person to make the decision for him? Is also a right question. So my argument is that if we want to do this, if we want to do this right, and we get only one chance to do it right, okay, then should India's economy be geared in a way that Facebook gets the pole position for the digital economy? Look at what China has done. Look at what we have done till now. Do you want to go down this path further? That's really the question to all of us. And let's face it, China is the only one country which we didn't think was doing this, but this is the consequence. We were all very critical of Facebook censorship. We said, why are they doing all this? But today, when you see the consequences for the digital economy, we are understanding that the digital economy, the personal data are very important issues. We didn't understand this 10 years back. I had no clue about it 10 years back, and I doubt that most of us had any clue about it. But today we are aware of it. So today, should we take the same decision? Is really the question. I of course would have a particular point of view. So I'm not going to say mine is the only correct point of view. But these are the questions we need to ask. And these are the questions we need to debate. That what is the kind of system we'll end up with if we take this fork down the road.
Prabir, Sundar here.
Yeah, Sundar.
Hey, I have two things that I want to relate to. So this is about close to 8 to 9 years back when Bill Gates had made a visit to India, and he was interviewing with Pranay Rai. And Pranay Rai asked the question to him saying, "Hey, in India, it's not so easy for us to afford PCs. So every time when your system starts, can you show up a Coke ad, and would that make it much more cheaper for farmers in India to buy a PC, and thereby you can monetize?" To which Bill Gates, in a very subtle manner, says if somebody is not able to afford a PC, Coke wouldn't be interested in showing an ad to them. So obviously, any company wanting to give anything for free is never going to be there for long. That's taken. And if you see us here, right, we all knew that Ola and Uber are not subsidizing stuff because they want to help us. They were literally killing out every other competition on the street. And it is something as small as somebody who's driving an auto for a living. And all of us did take that bait without probably paying much attention to it. And the thing is, when things are given for free, you do make a conscious choice of it when you can afford it. But when you can't afford it, you do tend to go towards the side where it's economically profit for you as an individual. And if I look at our current, Prime Minister having all hands with Mark and all of that, the primary job of a government is to actually regulate. And if they do that well, everything else could be so much more easier in the country. So I don't see any way in which this is going to be stopped, and I'm really fearing that. What is your thoughts on my reflection?
Well, I do agree that the Prime Minister going to the Facebook headquarters to have a town hall with Zuckerberg does give the wrong message in terms of the regulatory debate that we are having in the country. And that's why suddenly it's come back into news. Otherwise, more or less, it appeared that internet.org debate was over. And with what the Department of Telecom had put forward, in fact, Department of Telecom's basic note had very harsh things to say about any company acting as gatekeeper. Now, the question is, of course, when the Prime Minister goes and holds his public, shall we say, event with Mark Zuckerberg, then it does have an impact on the regulatory environment at home. Will that mean that net neutrality battle is over and Facebook has won? I don't think so. I think this is something that we will keep on discussing. It depends on how the Indian people react to it, what's the kind of what kind of opinions are expressed. And I don't know that even if we take quote unquote a wrong decision today, it's something that is sort of will be set in stone. It can change over a period of time also. So I am always half full person. So that's basically because I do believe that, if you have to struggle on any issue, you have to believe you will win. If you think that you will fail, you're unlikely to get into struggle. So as I said, as long as there is some water in the glass, I'm going to say it's always half full. So yes, you're right, that this is not an easy battle and it's become a little harder after this public event that we have seen. But I'm not giving up hope as yet. I trust all of young people here.
Thanks, Prabir. That gives some hope for me too.
Yeah, I think we should hard stop.
Nag has a question.
Somebody to read it because I can't.
Clients of mine have argued that government has failed to provide even basic services to most of our citizens like water, electricity, 70 years after independence. So why should we trust that they would get the internet utility right? How do I answer that?
Well, the question is that actually internet is much easier to give than water and electricity. So I would argue that yes, there is certainly a point there. But in the sense that the government is only providing an infrastructure and it is not something that it is actually delivering in this case. So the issues are really setting the right policies in this particular case, more than physically having to do something. Our last mile connectivity problem we have to solve in any case. Now, whichever way we solve it. If we solve it, then the rest is a policy money issue, and that's a much smaller solution. The real problem is when you have to bring an electricity cable to your house. It's a much more difficult problem, and how to supply that electricity is a much more difficult problem than laying telephone cables to your house, or even simpler, providing a wireless connection to your house. I mean, if you really thought that we'd have got telephone connections, say 25 years back on the scale we have got, it would not have happened with the wire technology. It happened only because of a wireless technology. To some issues you have a technical answer, to some you really don't. And that's the much harder problem that exists. As Chaitanya has me booked for the next part of the afternoon, so he's telling me I have to have a hard stop right now.
If someone has a question, it's okay, Praveen.
Okay.
But also another point is why Facebook, right? The alternative to Indian government is not the Facebook. Facebook has a proven record of giving people's information to the US government, to the NSA. So they are not just prone to man-in-the-middle attack, they are the men in the middle. So trusting Facebook is even stupider than trusting government.
And it's not even a question of trust. They are under law forced to give our data to US government anyway. Even if they had the best of intentions, it makes no difference to them. In fact, even with the best of intentions, they are under US law. That's the reality. So yes, you're completely right. Google, Facebook, anytime you use, your data belongs to NSA.
Recording of the conference has stopped.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for disrupting your lunch hour.
Please stop.